Hey, it's Jordan, and I am with old friend, current friend of Status Coup, Sam Oser, who is down in the polar vortex in Texas. From Houston, and I wanted to talk to you because, frankly, I've been so freaking busy, and I don't live in Texas, so I know Texas is corrupt. I know the governor is corrupt. I know that Texas is basically run by the fossil f***ers. But now the chickens are coming home to roost. You have, I think, 20 something people have died during this extreme weather.
Yeah.
Over 3 million without power. And it's affected you and people you know. So can you kind of just tell people like what is going on down there and how does this relate to the fossil fuel industry's complete stranglehold over the governor and the state government there?
Yeah, sure thing, Jordan. Thanks for having me on. So the climate apocalypse definitely made a dress rehearsal down here in the South. And I think it's really important for people to realize and understand that, first of all, we do not have the infrastructure for freezing temperatures, let alone freezing temperatures for days at a time. And we would have if we didn't deregulate ourselves. I was actually reading before we got on here about how California in 1996 was like the first state to try to deregulate and see what that looked like. And Enron played a role in that. And we all remember Enron and how great that went. And Enron was manipulating the prices in California. And it became very clear to the Californian grid managers at the time that in this free market, the electricity providers would just kind of bid and trade and bid and trade until it went from $1 a megawatt to like $15,000 a megawatt. It was a disaster. They retracted, and most states retracted their deregulation bills back then. But Texas said, hold my beer, and decided to maintain the track of deregulation. So I don't know if you guys heard of ERCOT, ERCOT. I was like, yeah, it's a weird acronym, but it stands for Electric Reliability Council of Texas. And they're actually a nonprofit that was founded in the 70s. They've been around a while, but they were appointed to oversee the Texas grid in early 2000 and 2002 when they decided to deregulate the market in Texas. So it's actually really great because they were appointed in 2002 and 2005, not even 3 years later, these were indicted in grid operator fraud case. 23 indictments on 5 former officials in 2005. And the current governor was actually the attorney general for it that took them to court and indicted them and whatever.
Can I just rewind? So when you
Yeah.
say that in 2002 or three, whenever they took over the grid, so was Texas on the federal grid at one point and then it went off grid? How did that work?
Yes. Yeah, it was on the federal grid with regulation, and they decided to get off the grid. The way they marketed it to people was the power to choose, and it was a pun because power, electricity. You get to choose your electric provider, and you get to determine the cost because you get to choose the lowest bid, which is just a bunch of bull, you know. And it was actually SB 7 bill. So our policymakers, our elected officials voted for this. And I think that's really important for people to realize that they voted for this. And we do actually have parts of Texas where it's not deregulated. It's still regulated and on the federal grid. So El Paso didn't lose power at all this entire time because they were part of the federal grid that has regulation and the grid is winterized, insulating, doing everything you need to do to prep for sub-zero temperatures. But they didn't do that when they went to deregulating because it was expensive. They were just cutting corners, so they would have to avoid doing that. So that's like some background.
Okay, people think corruption. You got Detroit, New Jersey, New York, but like Texas is like the old sewer, old boys type corruption, like at the OK Corral kind of corruption. So my understanding from the few stories I've covered down there is basically, I mean, you don't get elected at all in Texas unless you kiss the ring of the fossil f***ers. So Greg Abbott was Attorney General. Now he's been governor for many years, in addition to being a gun lunatic. He's basically enabled these all whether it be ERCOT or whomever, the fossil fuel companies, to cut corners because, you know, oil and gas, and they fund Greg Abbott and the rest of the Republican Party down there.
Yeah, it's cheaper. And like the so they oversee the grid, but the electricity comes from various places, right? It comes from natural gas, it comes from oil, it comes from nuclear. And what's really been pissing me off lately, there's so many things, but this one in particular, there was a tweet that ERCOT put out saying that they had some additional output that they could use from wind and solar. They said that themselves, that they had wind and solar that they could use. And the Republicans are out there using a Green New Deal as some sort of antagonist, like they're evil. And it's like, see, we wouldn't be able to do this with the Green New Deal or whatever that they're saying. It's like ERCOT themselves said they had extra supply because of wind and solar. What are you even talking about? Yeah, it's just been fun to watch.
And from what I've seen, Abbott and other Republicans down there have been blaming the wind mills, the wind farms on this, even though I think wind is like 10% of Texas's energy. So the reality is the coal, natural gas, their equipment is frozen because it's not weatherized. Yeah. They've cut corners, to make the almighty buck. Like we've seen in North Dakota and elsewhere, fossil fuel industry is pretty much kind of on their last stand. I mean, you could buy off the politicians for so long, but at some point, you're going to have to switch if we're all going to survive, including the rich people. So it seems to me that essentially Abbott, the others have let them run the state. We're talking about nuclear, the frackers, all of them. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I was down there covering the Trans-Pecos pipeline, which literally the company, Energy Transfer Partners, which owns the Dakota Access Pipeline, did not file in their whatever reports with FERC, the federal agency, that the Trans-Pecos pipeline was going to be going under the Rio Grande into Mexico. Like, kind of a significant deal that this is a multinational pipeline. It's not an interstate pipeline, but it was going into another country. They didn't. Right. They did not even disclose that until it was through. Nothing. I think there was a fine. So it just shows you essentially. And by the way, I don't know Texas politics, but I mean, it's not like the corporate Democrats over there are coming in. You know, they're, I would assume, beholden to big oil down there as well.
Oh, yeah, they definitely are. So what we're seeing down in Texas is similar what we've been seeing on the federal level, where the corporate Democrats just point at the Republicans for anything and everything. And it is true, they do have a slim majority in our legislature, but it's also true that they're just as spineless and complicit in a lot of ways. So right now, the corporate Democrats can rely on the political theater of pointing at the Republicans. Unfortunately, that's just enough to sway people into believing that there's two parties still.
And let me ask you, we'll get back to this polar vortex situation, but I want to ask on politics because I don't want to give anyone watching PTSD to relitigate the primary with Bernie and Biden and all that. But I don't know. I saw crazy long lines at universities, colleges, particularly in areas with a heavy Hispanic population of young people. And I think they were going for Bernie mostly, but, you know, the lines were through the roof. And Biden won Texas, but frankly, not by that much during the primary we're talking about. So you and I have talked off camera before that Texas is not like as, you know, red meat red as it once was. It's growing more progressive. Can you kind of talk about that in terms of, I mean, Bernie didn't lose the primary by that much. And frankly, I think there was a lot of suppression that went on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think something people need to realize about Texas is that Texas isn't a blue or red state. We are a non-voting state. I saw an article that was from like 3 years ago about how Texas ranked 46th in voting participation. So we're basically game for either one. It's just we don't vote. The people who are voting are old, white. We're also gerrymandered. We are so gerrymandered. It's disgusting how bad it is down here. And it's like every southern state, really. And I think it's just important to just emphasize that Texas is non-voting for one reason or another. We just don't vote. And that's really what it boils down to. I think we're more purple than we realize. And people are saying too, like, oh, it's the Californians moving to Texas for affordable housing. But a lot of the Californians are moving away from California to Texas because they're Republican refugees from the fruits and nuts of California. So they're not really helping us in that regard. We're just non-voting. That's what it boils down to.
Right. And I wonder how much of that is suppression, the restriction of polling places, and how much of it is growing apathy coming in across the board, particularly among young people that are tired of waiting on lines especially at the colleges. I saw lines for like 5-6 hours at some of these colleges. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. So how does this play out? I mean, honestly, right now it looks like I think 25 people, when I press record, have died. Millions are still without power. And it doesn't seem to me that Governor Abbott or any of these people, Ted Cruz is now back from his flight to Cancun, which is unbelievable, the sheer douchebaggery of this person. We already knew this, but the guy's going on a flight to Cancun during a freaking natural disaster. I mean, I know you're not an expert on this, but is Texas capable of fixing this in the next week or two, or?
No, I think we're capable of fixing it. I think anything is capable of being fixed, but will they? Probably not. We are currently in our Texas legislature session, and I haven't seen anything in our active session being proposed in committees this week to undo any of this or fix any of this. They could be doing it right now, but I haven't seen anything of it. I really don't think anything's really going to come from it because people are going to say, oh, this is a once in a lifetime thing. It's not going to freeze in Texas very often. And more importantly, the system puts profits over people. That's what we keep coming back to in every single report that Status Coup and anybody ever does is profits over people. And that's just what we're seeing down here. And I think that's what's going to be maintained. I don't think it's actually going to get fixed. I don't have any hopes that it will.
Well, I mean, don't worry. Biden says restoring the soul will do it. So as long as we restore the
soul, we go back to brunch now.
As long as we restore the soul.
Well, and it's been like extra complicated, right? Because we have this pandemic on top of it. And for people who have electricity, it would be easy to say, hey, come over to my house. You can just stay at my place. I have electricity. But then you have to take into the factor, okay, well, do you have COVID? Have you been tested for COVID? Who have you been around? Like, was it last night or the night before we lost electricity? And one of my friends was like, I have electricity, but I was around a COVID positive person and I haven't gotten my test results back. It's like, okay, all right, cool. So we can't go there. So then we have friends who own a theater. Huh?
It's a great point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And like we have friends who own a small community theater around here, and they are an enterprise customer for, um, right. So the enterprise customers kept their lights on, and enterprise customers just means that they're business owners. So they had their theater open and we're like, okay, well, we could go over there. But the wife has COVID. And even if we went clear to the other side of the theater, COVID is an airborne thing, right? So it wasn't safe. And then we went to people's houses in my neighborhood whose pipes had bursted. And we were like wearing masks and still trying to take COVID precautions on top of cleaning up disaster zones to prevent mold. Right now, the older people across the street from me, they have a hole in their wall and their ceiling. We were able to clean and get as much out of there as possible, but they're just in there with a hole in their wall, and they're like hesitant to come over here and be with us in our house that doesn't have holes or anything. Like we're okay because, COVID. So they're just kind of in their house. And we have electricity in our neighborhood right now, but there's a hole in their ceiling. It's been insane.
And my last question, your prediction, when do we see Beto O'Rourke get on top of that bar and announce he's running for governor? Because he's really, I've seen him everywhere the last few days. I'll give him a benefit of the doubt that he's genuine and, is trying to help people through this. But I don't know. He strikes me as not wanting out of the political scene. So I see him possibly using this as a way to run whenever Abbott is up.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. A lot of my reporting in Houston these days has been on like mutual aid work. But looking at ORourke and some of the emails I get from the Harris County Democratic Party, because he's down here a lot, just in general anyway. Like he's probably going to try to swing that bat to go for governor, and I don't know how well he's going to do because he's not much different from Abbott in his policies, and his messaging. Like Democratic messaging is so weak. But it's weak on purpose, right? Because anything stronger would be challenging their donors.
Well, I think O'Rourke is the 40 years younger, not a senile version of Joe Biden. All these wonderful, aspirational things about our compass and our morality and all this. He's kind of like, I hate to say it, some people get pissed off, but he really reminded me of a white Obama when he was trying to run for president.
No, that's exactly what I was about to say too. I went to the Texas Democratic Party convention when he was running, and he's very aspirational and just full of really wonderful PR talking points, but that's about it. And then, of course, he pulls out his skateboard and tries to skate around Whataburger, and the liberals lose their minds, and it's just... And he's so cute, too. He's not. I'm being sarcastic.
On that note, we'll keep in touch. I'm glad you're quasi-safe. Earlier, you were getting wood, just to make sure in case power went out. Colin... our other Texan with Status Coup is he's got power, but he's running low on food, he told me. So, we'll stay in touch. And thanks for filling us in on the cesspool that is Greg Abbott's Texas.
Yeah, no problem. Living it up. Let me know.
Give Sham a shout out. She's in our chat quite often, helping moderate things. So,
Yeah, when I'm not in a climate apocalypse, I am in the Status Coup chat as Status Coup.
All right, thanks. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.